Do you want more out of life? The law of attraction and manifestation practices can do absolutely wonderful things. I know they have in my life, and I suspect in yours. But if we're really honest, in our guts, it doesn't always seem to work. Now, my guest today, Royce Christyn, has written a new book, Scripting the Life You Want. And it is hands down the most exciting book on manifestation practice I've read this year. Now, what Royce has done is he's combed through and researched and looked at exciting new scientific discoveries that explain how we can improve the odds and how we can make our dreams come true more often. Now, he's even going to explain how a simple app connected to a quantum computer, now this is mind-blowing, a simple app connected to a quantum computer can bring amazing new experiences into your life. The key is breaking through our habitual patterns of how we behave and how we act in the world. And this new science from Royce is going to help you do just that. We'll see the world in a new way when he's through. So my interview with Royce Christyn starts now. So I think let's look at some of the components that sort of underlie your theory of why mind metaphysics practices work, and I think this is something that most of our viewers are familiar with. I know when Diane and my wife and I were interested in van camping, suddenly we noticed van campers everywhere. You buy a certain model of, say, a Toyota, and suddenly you see that model of Toyota everywhere. And that relates to a specific part of the brain, and a part of the brain that Royce says is kind of one of the keys to understanding how manifestation works. Can you connect the dots there for us, Royce?
Yeah, absolutely. So great example. Exactly what you just said. If anybody out there watching, if you ever hear a number like 1111 or 333, or I always use the example because usually when I'm teaching a class or a workshop and I use the example of Windsor, Queen Elizabeth, I don't know why, but students will come back almost daily for a few weeks going, Queen Elizabeth is everywhere, or Windsor, I keep seeing the word. It's just an example that I like to use. It's a little far out enough that people don't hear it as much. I also have to apologize. I'm babysitting my mother's parrots, so you're going to hear too a little bit of whistling noises. That is the birds in the background. Anyway, and they do that sometimes too. So with what I study and what I research, one of the coolest things was learning about the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon. So for about 25 years, when anyone would see or hear the same number, or someone would mention something, they would attribute it to what's known as the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon, which is you start to notice everything over and over and over again. But more recently, in the last 5 years, they actually were able to correlate what is going on in our minds, and specifically what is actually physically going on in our brains when we hear a number or a phrase like 1111 or Windsor or Queen Elizabeth, and we start seeing it everywhere. And that part of our brain is called the Reticular Activating System, or the RAS. Now, for anybody out there watching, don't leave yet. I swear it's not going to be a boring science lesson. Because basically what they figured out was the RAS controls the part of our brain that acts like a filter to us. So I like the example, Mel Robbins talks about the Reticular Activating System a lot. That's actually where I first heard of it a few years ago. And she uses the example of, have you ever just looked at a Facebook page? There is so much information on there. There's ads here and people here and pictures there and videos there. And it's a really good analogy. If your brain was taking all that in at once, you'd go nuts. And that's true of everything in our lives. So what the RAS does, I call it the extra comm system, extra communication. And I named it that for our purposes and for this book. I kind of use them interchangeably because it's really helpful to understand what it does. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more, but it's also really crucial to know you program it. You tell the RAS and that part of your brain what to focus on, which is why we have things like the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon. We have 1111 and Windsor and all these things that, like you said, a car will start popping up everywhere, because what it does is it cares really about two things: survival This part of your brain is focused on what's going to help you stay alive and what you tell it to focus on. So there's a lot of great studies, I talk about them in the book, that show essentially when you, for instance, wake up in the morning and you say, I'm gonna have a bad day, then suddenly, or everybody hates me, your brain will actively use the RAS to start not filtering out the bad stuff. And it will start bringing in all these examples to basically, you hear a confirmation bias, that's your reticular activating system at work. So when I first read about it and started studying it, it was fascinating because my mind always goes to why. I always want to know why everything works. And I also always like to figure out how we can integrate all this really cool science into manifesting. And not everything works, but this is one that works really, really well. And obviously my book is about scripting and my own unique way of scripting. And I realized pretty quickly that this answered a big question of mine that I'd had for a very long time, which was, what is going on when we script, and why do some things just seem to start happening in a very, I would almost say, very fast, almost aggressive in a positive way, if that makes sense. I would notice this correlation for 15 years, but I never understood what was doing it. So what our RAS does, our reticular activating system does, is we are programming it to pick up on all the things in our life. So when you start to write out your day as if it's already happened in the morning, like the exercise that I cover in my book, your brain is now getting essentially instructions from you. And it will start to pick out all the examples, opportunities, people, phone numbers, anything in your environment, even emails or junk emails. There's so many interesting avenues. And I have a theory that I actually don't talk about too much in the book, but I have a theory of what else is going on with this. And I'll explain what I mean in a second. But basically, when you're scripting and when you're writing down intention lists, you're reprogramming your brain to open up and look for what's going on. So I've been using this for a few years and studying this science behind this part in our brain. And what's really interesting is actually after I wrote the book, which was the end of 2018, very beginning of last year, I started to realize that I lost things all the time. But if I would say out loud, as I started to think, well, if I'm going to just use the RAS in a different way besides writing, if my brain has seen it. So for instance, if you walk home and you put your keys mindlessly on the table and then you walk away, your brain still, it picked up that information. It took it in. It just filtered out remembering it because you probably had 500 other things going on that it was focusing on because you told it to. So what I realized is, and yeah, you sound a little crazy when you do it at first, but if I would say, hey brain, where are my keys? And just let it go, within 30 to 60 seconds, they would just be where they always were, but I would find them. I lose three things all the time: my keys, my phone, and my Yeti mug, my reusable mug, which, you know, it sounds crazy, but I do all the times. I'm putting it everywhere. So what I started to realize was that verbally saying to your brain things like, hey brain, where is my mug? It's silly, but it works because it kind of snaps you out of focus for a second and just enough back into focus that I have almost 100% success rate. When I started teaching this to people this year, everyone looks at me like I'm nuts at first, but try it because that's your reticular activating system at work. And it works on a lot of things, but it's really fun if you're like me and you lose your keys or whatever, you lose something, just say out loud, hey brain, find my keys. And out loud is important because if you're, you know, I would do it at home maybe the first few times because you sound a little weird, but once you get used to doing it after a week or two out loud, you can basically just stop yourself and just say it in your head and you don't sound like a crazy person out in public. But that is your filter at work. And it's a really good way to test and sort of see what's going on, because I believe that there are so many good things. This is the point I was making earlier, already in our environment that help us create what we want in our lives. But and everyone does this, it's a normal human thing. We have so many other things that we've told our brain to focus on in our own environment that it's just filtering out all these opportunities, people, places, things that would help us. And this is just one aspect of it. And if I'm rambling now, I feel like, but I could go on and on. And it really connects to one of my major first points in the book, which is perception, which we can get into a little bit because it's really key to understand, I think, perception, the science behind perception, to get a really good grasp on how manifesting, creating your world, even self-empowering works, like self-empowerment. All of those things are really about perception.
Okay, so let's move to that. One of the other really mind-blowing things that you dive into, among many, is this idea that we don't see reality as it is, and that we are living in a sort of a virtual simulation, not unlike the Matrix movies.
Yeah, and to clarify, yeah, that sounds horrifying when I hear out loud. No, and not because you're not right. I write about this, but I want to be really clear, not for you, because I know you know this, but for anybody who hasn't read the book or this is their first time hearing me, I don't think that we so much live in a simulation like you hear everybody putting out, or a hologram. You hear just, it's the new, I think, thing that's regurgitated ad nauseum. First it was quantum physics and mechanics for about 20 years, and now we're in a simulation. Now, I think there is a lot going on that backs up where those ideas are coming from and what people are experiencing. I think we're not there yet, and it makes us all sound crazy in the new thought movement to go, we're in a simulation. Now, mind you, I name a whole chapter, a whole section of a chapter, How to Break Out of the Simulation for $0, which is purposely a bit of a play on words, because I noticed as I was researching for this book, and it took a few years to research, how exponential the idea of simulation was in the new help and even self-help movements. And I wanted to find out what was going on, because I've experienced really weird things. We all have. But I knew that if I just dove into what was already being basically regurgitated, that I would get lost, in the muck with everybody else, because it didn't feel 100% right. So before we get into the simulation and what that all is, it's better, I think, to understand perception. So like you said, in the book, I talk about it a lot. And it's one of the big points I like to make. So what kind of got me off into this rabbit hole originally was a professor named Donald Hoffman at UC Irvine here in California. And he has a TED Talk, and he has a fabulous TED Talk. You can Google it, Professor Donald Hoffman. I talk about it in the book. I break it down. And essentially, he and his team, they study perception. And he studied it for years. And you could even see in the talk, and he has a couple of really fascinating talks, but you can see how it kind of, this is a loving phrase. I think he's a fantastically brilliant guy, and I don't really think his brain is broken, but it's a funny phrase where you could just tell that this is not at all where he expected to land. What I'm about to explain, that where he landed, he didn't know he was going to be there. And it's hard, because I feel like a lot of us in this world are in the same boat where, we're in a lot of uncharted territory with figuring out the nature of our reality, why manifesting works, why we can bring things into our lives, and also rationalizing that with what we've been brought up and what we know and what we're taught and what society considers acceptable. So Donald Hoffman, essentially his core point is that he's figured out is that perception does not favor reality. And he uses a really great example. He uses a couple, but one that he starts off with is the Australian outback has something called a jewel beetle, little bug, brown, glassy. And for thousands of years, maybe more, this jewel beetle made it successfully in the Australian outback. And then suddenly, about 100 years ago, they start to die off in massive numbers, and no one could figure it out. There wasn't anything in the air. There wasn't anything in their food supply wrong. It wasn't pollution. They could not figure out what it was. Finally, they realized back then that the thing that was screwing the environment up was beer bottles. It was humans that were throwing brown, glassy beer bottles, because the beetle the male beetles couldn't tell a difference and didn't understand the difference between an empty beer bottle and a female jewel beetle. So when they got rid of it, they had to change the color of their beer bottles and actually change everything in Australia with how beer bottles were made, and hopefully, tell people to stop polluting and throwing them in the outback. And suddenly the population rose back up and they're fine. So what he explains, and I highly recommend everyone watch his talk and read my very extensive breakdown in my book. But what Donald Hoffman explains is we are not different in many ways. And he has a lot of data and science. Again, I encourage everyone to look him up to back it up. And I have it all in the book. But essentially, he believes that the way that our eyes process what is actually out here is not unlike a desktop on a computer. So essentially, we don't really need to know if we're looking at our desktop, we have a file that says interview with Harv Bishop, and I have all my notes in there. I don't need to understand necessarily from an evolutionary standpoint, the diodes and the electron, all the electrical facets and everything going on in the laptop that makes the screen work, that, you know, because it's not an actual file. It's a projection essentially of an image of a file, but it ends up not mattering because what I need from it is my notes, and I still get that. But that's not actually a real file on the screen. And he likens that to how we perceive reality. What they figured out was they started running these tests of populations of humans in a computer program where they would essentially make them able to perceive reality more and more and more and more. And in every test, 100% of the time, nature and evolution for humans didn't favor the population that could see real reality. However, they programmed it into that simulation that they ran the tests on. It actually favored evolution and people and our whole journey and whatever they were doing and they programmed it to be. It favored a very mixed version of what was really going on, and in some cases, not the actual real reality itself. So I know that sounds a little weird and confusing, but the main point with perception is it's really crucial to understand that there's a few layers here. There is the reticular activating system, which is one area of science which proves, I mean, you could see it in your everyday life once you start applying, you know, programming to it essentially, that we don't see things. We're not pulling everything in. And then the other layer is perception. It's really all about perception. And for me, at least, when I started to understand the science behind why it's not what it seems, but not in a weird woo-woo way, but there is a lot of actual data to back up that we are not intaking what's around us at all, right? Essentially, we're just filtering and manipulating it somehow. It made a lot more sense to me, at least, why we can manifest and things appear, and really interesting experiences and people and places are things that are able to be created. Because I think, and this is just my own personal belief, and at least I have a lot of evidence that most of these things are already around us. And if we look at the world like a computer in a way, or some sort of database, something digital, it's all in there, but it's not always, you know, again, with the computer analogy, not everything's on your desktop even. A lot of stuff's, you know, not everything is even on your computer, but it's on the internet. You can gain it somehow. You can go get it, if you will. So for me, it sounds a little weird and like a juxtaposition to say, don't think of it like a simulation, but also our world's like a computer. But for me, at least, when you start to just think of it more as your brain is a computer, and it's also a tool that's sort of pulling in whatever is actually around us, not that what's around us is fake. That's the difference here. I believe what's around us is real. I don't think someone can flip a switch someday and the simulation turns off and, you know, we're all in the matrix. I don't see any evidence pointing to that in all my research. What I found is a lot more exciting, which is that as we're kind of traversing, if you will, into the future here, they're finding a lot of things in science and research are all backing up that we have a lot more going on than we can perceive at the moment. And once you can look at it and see it from that viewpoint of science, I found at least that you start creating, I have at least, a lot more in your life because it just grounds it and makes it real, that there is a lot of data to back up what's going on. And I know a lot of people say, I don't like science, I don't like data. I don't care, because unfortunately we are raised in a society where that is such a key part of our lives that I found even the most, this isn't a bad thing, spiritual anti-science person in the world has some really deep beliefs, fundamental beliefs that science is the be-all end-all at the end of the day. They may never admit it to themselves. And I found with working with people that when they start to actually look at the science, it's not scary, it's fascinating, it's way more interesting, for me at least, when you actually look at these papers and talk to these doctors and talk to these scientists, because they're all going, what the hell happened? Why they don't know why we're here. And it's fascinating to me because we've been saying this, and the New Thought movement's been saying this for 100 years, more than that. And it's starting to correlate in a really exciting way. And what I found is the people who maybe have shied away from science, something shifts and changes in them when they actually see the real science that backs up what they believed the whole time, even if they thought they maybe didn't like science, or science was anti-spiritual. I found the total opposite, honestly. And I know you were talking last night a little bit about, there's a few other people that are on the same road that I'm on here with connecting a lot of the science with the spiritual. And after, for those watching, Arvid, I were emailing back and forth last night, and I was thinking about something he said, and I realized, it might not be that there needs to be a bridge between science and spirituality, but maybe there isn't anything in between them. It might be the same animal, two parts of the same animal, if you will. And we're getting there, but slowly, but we're getting there.
To jump back to your point about the simulation, one of the things that struck me in the book is you said you don't see it that we're living within a simulation, rather that we're creating the simulation within our own consciousness.
Oh yeah. So because of my own research and my own experience, and my experience with thousands of friends, families, students, I have come to the conclusion that we are essentially, if you look at your brain like a computer or even a projector that's pulling things in and showing you the world, it's helpful to look at it like a simulation for that one reason, that it's not that, like I said earlier, everything around us is not there or fake or unreal. It's more that our brains are perceiving and taking in all of this data, because everything is data, which is a really important point that people need to remember. But it's taking in everything around you and everything around your experience and everything you're telling it. This is your brain to take in or focus on. And it's essentially manipulating in a way, and not, it sounds negative, but it's not. It's changing what you are actually receiving and seeing and hearing and witnessing in your life. And in many ways, it's constructing the environment, because if you think about it, if you're programming yourself to see only good and positivity, and you always have your keys at your computer or whatever it is that you're focused on, your whole life experience is just going to be different. One great example, I was working with a group of realtors this past December, and there was a girl. I always ask everybody, what are their goals? Like, what are their really, really big goals, and what are their really, really small goals? And this one realtor, this is Hollywood Hills, Sunset Boulevard, one of the top real estate firms in the country, and they cover all Beverly Hills and LA. It's and it's a great group of people. A friend of mine runs it, and she asked me to come in and kind of show them what I've taught her to do. So one girl in there said she wanted to do a $10 million sale. She was new. And I said, okay, this is going to be super easy, because you have everything already lined up around you. You already have the job. You're in the market. You literally live in Beverly Hills. You just have to tell your brain what you want, because there's some disconnect going on. You need to use scripting in a very simple, easy way, which I know we're going to talk about later in part 2. But I said to her, essentially what I've just talked about, which is she needed to explain to herself what it is that she wanted. So I told her really simple, for a couple days, write out your intention, $10 million sale, and make sure you're reminding yourself that's what you want, because your brain will start to piece together things and your environment that it already is aware of, and it'll find new things as you're going through your day. So a week later, she did it. A week later, she was at her coffee shop, her favorite coffee shop, and she ran into, he's actually, he's a very, very famous entrepreneur. And he was doing a book signing right next door. There's a coffee shop, bookstore right next to each other. They got to talking. She was a big fan of his, and he had a property he was selling and hadn't found a realtor that he resonated with yet. And she was a big fan of his, and now they're working together, and she has this amazing property. The weird thing, though, when she called me, she's like, Royce, I don't get it. He's someone I look up to and admire, and he had this book signing. Apparently, there was a sign outside for a month, and she didn't see it. So she knew she liked this guy. Her brain, if you will, it knew that this guy had money, and this is someone she looked up to, and knew that there was going to be a book signing. It just wasn't filtering in, because she was so overwhelmed with not making sales and all the other normal things, good and bad, in her life, that her brain was filtering it out. So the second she just made really a very slight adjustment, everything opened up, and it was already there in front of her. And now she has a fantastic client, a new friend, and actually I think they're on their second property just in a few months together. So yeah, and the sale is, as far as I know, it's still pending, as far as they haven't sold it yet, but she's very much on the road to doing it. So, that's how I think people need to look at the idea of our brain is simulating, putting this construct together around us, and it's using what we tell it to use. It's like a recipe, you know, and we're telling our brains, and I say our brains, and it's really important for people listening to remember, it helps, I think, and I found, to look at our brains like a brilliant computer that also is a projection, some sort of projection device, because it's taking in data and it's projecting essentially out into our world what data in our outside world that's already there we're going to let in. So that's there's a lot more to the simulation, because that was where I was really happy to have landed, and I'm still there a few years ago. And then quantum computing and the Fatum bot and all these different things came into my life, which I know we're going to talk about, and it just expanded it a little bit more and made it a little bit more fun and interesting as far as how far we can take this idea of our brains acting essentially as this simulation creator, but really just sort of a program around us that we're programming, and we're taking in what we want to take in.
As you note in the book as well, it's not just the New Age fringe. We have some pretty major and respected world-class scientists who are paying attention to this sort of thing as well.
That's the craziest thing. I mean, look, I was 10 years ago, I was really lucky to grow up in a family that studied New Thought and believed in positive thinking. So from a really young age, my grandmother and my mom, they taught me all the basic principles, and they were the whole reason that, at least what I believe, they're the whole reason that I was able to go where I went in my life, because I had all these tools at a really young age. But even up to 10 years ago, I just sort of bought into the idea that science and spirit spirituality and New Thought are very different. And you made a really great point in the opening about the word science is so ingrained into many of the New Thought religions and movements, but it's not represented, I guess, as far as what's going on in modern day technology and science, as well as maybe it was 100 years ago, even, because it helps to remember that this was groundbreaking stuff 100 years ago, and they were utilizing many of the great minds, scientists, and otherwise today. So yeah, so basically when I really started to get into science, and I'm a big science geek, I've always been a science nerd, so it was always conflicting with my spiritual side, if you will. And when I really dove in, I was stunned, like you just said, to see some of the greatest minds that have ever lived, even Stephen Hawking, talking about multiverses and parallel dimensions and the future affecting the past. And I go into this in the book, but I really had to reevaluate everything. And I hope that I present it in a way in this book that helps people do it in a very gentle and fun way. Because for me, it was definitely a transition, at least mentally, to go from thinking that they didn't connect the spiritual manifesting world and science, except maybe quantum physics, but that always annoyed me because it wasn't 100% right. But we figured it out in this book, so I'm really happy about that. And when I saw all these incredible papers, I mean, you should see this office. I mean, it is literally just crammed. I had to expand into this whole other extra room that was the dining room just from the research papers, because I'm that big of a science nerd, and I print everything out. But it's been fascinating seeing and watching almost the scientist's journey from not being very spiritual to being very spiritual. Quantum physicist, who I won't name, but I spoke to, had a great statement. He said, "I'm a recovering quantum physicist." I said, "Why?" And he's like, "Well, I am one, but I didn't believe in God or anything." And as he went further in his journey and he did a lot of research on his own, and he saw this stuff firsthand, he started to believe in a higher power and a source or a universe. So it's been really interesting to see these guys who you would think maybe would have a more sophilistic, or, oh, we create everything or it's all done view, actually going the other way. And these experiments have created a foundation of spirituality instead of the other way around. And I think it's doing the same thing. I know it did for me and a lot of the people I work with. On the reverse, we're actually having the science help me ground myself even further and grow spiritually. So there's something going on that I love, and it makes me grin from ear to ear, because these worlds are fundamentally connected. And I just think that no one on either side had really been communicating with each other until the last maybe 2 decades. And really the last 5 to 10 years, finally, there's been more of an open dialogue. And I hope that anybody out there watching does research on there. And I always say, go out, don't take my word for it. Go out there and look up what we talked about and what I talked about, because there's so much there. And it's like a spiritual experience for me, at least, that a lot of people, when I point them to this stuff, reading what would seem like very boring from their titles, papers, but when you actually get into it, they're fascinating. All they do is really back up and confirm what New Thought's been saying for 100 years.
Yeah, I was so fascinated with that section, as I told you in an email. It just, it was a literal mind stretch and mind blowing. So let's venture into some more mind blowing aspects here. One of the things I was struck by was the chaos game, and so I had something Diane and I had happened to us a couple of years ago, and so I'll throw that out and see if you think the chaos game might have something to do with it.
Go for it, because I finally, my nerves are done, and for everybody out there watching, I'm very excited to interview with Harvey, so I was very nervous, so finally I got it on. So please talk for a little while. Okay. I would love to hear your story.
Okay, I'll make it as brief as possible. But we were planning on going to a movie in South Denver, and theater we had never been to. The night before, I dreamed we were in East Denver, and I ran into a smart-ass sales clerk, female. She was nice, but a smart-ass. Yeah. So the next day, we set up for the theater in South Denver. We'd never been there. We're lost. I mean, we're absolutely lost. I'm not asking for directions. Diane was not too happy about that. And so then we're completely lost. And then I cannot describe how many random turns that we made. We end up in East Denver. And so then we pop a U-turn, and it's like, oh, there's a Sprouts. I'll pick up some of their tomatillo salsa. So I go in, I'm checking out with the tomatillo, and I get the smart-ass clerk, just as she was in the dream.
Wow.
So,
yeah.
So it's like I get that we can have precognitive dreams, precognitive experiences, but what's always thrown me about that story is that the huge
turns.
number at the random turns with
yeah.
no plan, and then boom. So is that something that the chaos game would speak to, or?
Yes, you nailed it. You literally nailed it. That's one of the best stories out the gate that I've heard where someone's correlated it directly. So, okay. If you go on my website, roycechristyn.com, and maybe Harvey, we could put it in the article for this video. We'll link to the video that I use all the time of the chaos game. So I will preface this with saying, for anybody out there who's about to jump in and watch it, it's kind of fun, because for me at least, I know when I started showing it in classes, and I do private coachings, and when I started showing it to students, even that group of realtors, I wasn't prepared for the face drops and the stunned silence and very almost creeped out expressions that people get when they watch the chaos game happening for the first time. So for those people out there, chaos game involves something called the Sierpinski Triangle. So essentially, I'm going to try to break it down very, very simply. And this has been around for years. And the video I use is actually from a mathematician. It's all mathematicians, their YouTube channel called Number Files. So these are not people who are really, as far as publicly, and I know, they're not into anything New Thought or anything like this, or they weren't. Things are changing, like you said. But for this example, and for me explaining it, it's better just to understand this is not something that's just pulled out of thin air. This is, the chaos game is actually very old, and it creates a lot of confusion. So what it is this. Take a set of dice, and you can do this on a piece of paper. Now they do it with computers. And what you do is 3 points. You're making a triangle, right? So what? A, B, C, A, B, C. 2 die. And you just label it A, B, and C. And you'll see this on the video. And you roll the die. It's supposed to be random. And let's say it's between 1 and 2. You could start with a point anywhere on the piece of paper, inside or outside the triangle. But whatever you roll, if it's 1 and 2, it's going to be halfway between A and B. If it's 3 and 4, halfway between B and C. If it's C and D, if it's 5 and 6, you'll move the dot. Basically, what you're doing is every time you roll the dice, you're putting a new dot somewhere between these lines in this triangle that you formed. And it's a lot easier when you watch it. But please feel free to butt in if I'm missing anything here, Harvey. But essentially what happens after a while, hundreds and then thousands of spins, and there's also, I want to add, you could do this, there are a lot of online free resources, and I'll make sure I have some on my website too, that you can basically plot the points of the triangle and have a computer roll the die very quickly for you. And what happens is, after a while, no matter what, no matter where you put your dot originally, and no matter how many times you roll the die, or who rolls the die, or how many people are there, this very, at first unsettling but confusing image appears, where the triangle, the space in between, forms other triangles, and basically there's black triangles that are from all the dots you've been marking, and there's empty space. And that creates what's known as the Sierpinski Triangle. And why that's so confusing for people who might be a little lost is the empty space is always in the same spot. From a supposedly random dice roll, no matter who does it or what does it, this very weird image of triangles within triangles appears, but the dots never land in the white space, the blank space, ever, no matter what they do. And this has confused mathematicians for over a century. So how does that apply to what we're doing? I, again, recommend everybody watch it. You could actually, in my book, I have an image of it. Actually, you know what? I have one right here. It might help people a little bit. I know it's going to be a little rough, but this will definitely help explain it. Here we go. Okay. So for those who have the book at home, 121. Okay. Can you see that, Harvey? All right. So if you look, all of those black marks are dots, and they represent where people have thrown the die and made a dot, essentially. And the white spaces never get filled in. So that's the most basic version of the chaos game, is rolling the die and filling it in, but it always is the same. Now, you could play with it and actually add more points originally. You could do squares and octagons and whatever. And what's really trippy, or at least was for me, is, and this is also on the same video example on my website, when they started to play around with the number of dots and they were just using these supposedly random things, images like the triangle would appear, but they would be much more complex. And one of the main ones is a fern and a plant, and it literally looks like a gorgeous fern. And they actually, computer programmers and video game programmers, use the chaos game and the formulas that have come out of it to, you know, when you're having to map out all these environments and make really realistic worlds, if you will, in video games, they use the Sierpinski method and the triangle with the chaos game to actually create a lot of the images that you see that look very realistic or photorealistic. So why does this creep everybody out? The question, obviously, is that they can't answer is why, when you roll the die, are there no dots ever, no matter what you do, in the blank spaces of the triangle? And it's where they started to realize things were a little wacky is no matter where they would put the first initial dot, whether inside or outside or anywhere, they couldn't get the die. And again, I highly recommend people watch the video to really grasp it. It's a very short video. They can never get the points to leave and go inside of those blank spaces I just showed everyone. So what scientists started to figure out was, well, wait a minute. If this is happening here on this very fundamental level with this really simple exercise, if you think of yourself, if you will, as both the Sierpinski triangle and the die that you're rolling, do people never go into these voids, they're called? Do they ever go into these blank spaces? Or are we just basically not predetermined, but is there something going on where we have essentially not a pattern, but a very, very strict one where we never go or see or move into these other spaces if you apply it to the world around you? So long years of not knowing what to do, basically. And they realized that to really break out and break the Sierpinski triangle, they needed a quantum computer. And that's how this journey, and I talk about this in the book, with this fascinating group of guys, and these are really, really brilliant scientists and investigators like us who wanted to figure out how to basically use quantum computing. And the idea of really never being able to move out of these predetermined pathways that are in our lives for whatever reason. No one really knows the answer. But was there a way to actually, in our own world, start exploring to see if we could get out of our predetermined roads, or whatever you want to call it, and go into those blank spaces? So they got a quantum computer. They created a fascinating, I cannot express my excitement about it, because we're going to get into why it's even more exciting. It's just the coolest thing ever, the weirdest thing ever. But they created an app, super easy on your phone. I have all of the instructions in my book. I have them. They will be up on the website by the time this is on, because they're going up in about 2 days, of how to download it. It's very easy. And what the app does, it connects to a quantum computer, and you send it your location. It's totally protects your privacy, all that stuff, so no one has to worry. And you set a radius around you of how far you would be willing to walk. And it actually sends it to the quantum computer with the map, and it sends you back longitude and latitude, a location that is outside of your predetermined area. And I know it sounds a little bit wild, but it's true, and it works. And I go into a really long explanation in my book, and also there's fantastic information on the link. It's called Randonauts. I'm going to have everything up on roycechristyn.com. I'll make sure Harv has it too, for anybody out there who wants to go and explore and read about it on their own. But the idea these guys had was, what would happen if we publicly made this available, and what's going to happen? Because what the scientists realized was, when they would get this location back, they would go on a walk, and they would walk to this point, and they would see things in their own neighborhood, on their own campuses, that they never knew existed. And they would see wild things, weird things. And we'll talk about the examples that I've experienced in the book. But they also noticed something else. And this is what caught my eye when I was researching. And interestingly enough, in the original manuscript for this book, it did not include the Fatum bot, because it is so new. It's literally just about hitting a year old, and that's what it's called, the Fatum bot out there, Fatum. I was working, and we were playing with it and using it so much, and it came up for the edit of the book, and I called my editor Jenny. I said, you have to try this, number one, and then tell me what you think. But now it's that missing key and piece that I've been looking for. And obviously she agreed, and they all tried it at the publishers, and they were fascinated, and we made sure to get it in about an extra 30 pages into the book that helped explain it and then cover it. But what it does is, it was doing these, the scientists and the researchers, was they realized that if they were thinking about something, or whatever, if they were writing things down, that they would go out on these walks to these locations. And the whole point of the walks too is, the walk itself is very weird. And you do feel, one of the things they say is, you feel almost this despair, or almost like this feeling of, and this is very new stuff for everybody out there watching, but they feel, a lot of people get this, oh, I shouldn't go there. That same sensation that you get maybe when you're in a bad area, or you're walking alone at night. And it's a mimetic thing. It's a mind, they call it the despair meme. And it is, in a way, it's when you start to break out, if you will, of your normal predetermined area. There is this very strange, I say about 80% of the cases, and everybody, you can go online and look at the stories. It's really interesting, because as you're going to the area, the things that you're witnessing tend to correlate with what is going on in your life. Or what I did is just reworked it and started realizing that you could script and put down things you want, and then hit the button and get the location and walk to it. And sort of, for me at least, it looks like, not looks like, but it does really adjust your environment in a way that it's bringing in new things. It's almost like a direct route to what you're writing down and what you're manifesting. And it's like a catalyst, or sort of a pathway, using this app, it's connecting a quantum computer, you're putting your intentions out there. And what the scientists realized, and they wanted to see if it would happen with the people, this was the whole point, is images on walls and pictures. They would go to points, and the weirdest things would be at the point they would get to. I don't think I even mentioned this in the book, because I didn't have a camera. The first time I ever did it, I live in a very, very quiet neighborhood in LA County here in California. It is mostly people 70 and up, and then me. It's just a very, it's about as just it's no colleges. There's not a lot of people under the age of 60, 70. And I love it. It's perfect for me because I like to write. This is, it's a very quiet little area, but and I know most of the people that live around me. I know my neighborhood really well. I go jogging here every day. And the first time I ever used the Fatum bot, it took me 2 blocks from my house. And I'm not joking. I wish I had a camera. It's the only reason I didn't use this example in the book, but I'll say it here. There were, and this is an example of the weirdness, there were 5 college kids shirtless with a girl in a bikini doing beer pong loudly by themselves in the middle of what I always knew to be an even quieter little cul-de-sac. And they're screaming and yelling. And as I'm walking, first of all, they're so out of place. I'm not even doing justice to just how, I mean, that's great, good for them, but they just made no sense. And I realized that as I was going and walking towards them, I was terrified because I didn't expect to see anything weird, to be honest with you, when I first started researching the Theta Bot. It sounds really wacky, but it was so bizarre and out of place. And this was a cul-de-sac that I had driven by the actual street and walked by, but I never actually walked in it before. And as I was walking through, on the ground, there were all these sidewalk chalk drawings from a different house. And one of the words was Rolls Royce. And I thought that was really, now I literally lost it and went back home. I was just very freaked out. And my partner, Sally, he's like, well, I want to do it now. So immediately I was like, no, I don't know. But they tell you when you first start doing it to, if you can, use your willpower. Don't do anything unsafe. Obviously, don't go into a bad area. But if it's just your neighborhood, try to override that feeling of this is really creepy and keep going, keep doing it. So we did. And I have a lot of really great examples in the book, because what we ended up starting to do with the Fatum bot in this app was I knew that just based on all the research of what the scientists had figured out, that there was a way to turn it around and utilize this tool for manifesting. So we started a game where Sally is my partner, and him and I would write out notes or images or pictures on just our iPhone app, like on the notepad, and we just draw it out real quick. And then you get a power, it's called, when there's a number, and it could be between 0 and I think 3,000. Usually it's between 0 and 50. And the higher the number of the power of the location, so it'll give you, let's say, an intersection down the block from you, Harv, and it might say it's a 9. That's a really strong, that's going to be very, according to the quantum computer's data, it's very outside of your normal realm where you're going. Now, I've had really interesting experiences with 2s. I've had really weird experiences with 25s. I noticed it usually lands this number between 0 and 25, at least for us. But anyway, whoever gets the higher number, when Sally and I would draw it out, we would just go to their location, because when you go with the person, another friend or a person, it's even weirder, because something is going on where you are being directed out of your normal day-to-day experience. And how the mechanics of this all works is fascinating to me. It's very weird to the scientists, but we started to see literal, and I have images of everything in the book, direct images. So one of the things, it was June, it was Pride Month, and so I drew a rainbow, a wagon wheel, and a cactus. And I talk about this in the book. We go out on this walk, and none of those things are around. I don't even know where I came with the wagon wheel idea. It was just something I was trying to purposely push the boundaries of. This is when we were really starting to test what are you manifesting when you do this? Is it just things in your environment, or can you bring things in? So literally we start walking, we go to one point, and there's sidewalk chalk. Again, the sidewalk chalk is everywhere for me, at least. And everybody finds their own thing. It's interesting. Sally and I both see a lot of these very, very weird yellow trees. They're they're eucalyptus trees that smell like lemons. I forget the name, but cactus, like things that are normal, you'll just start seeing a lot. And they don't know why. A lot of people see owls. A lot of people see owl is kind of becoming the symbol of the group of people who do this. They call themselves randonauts, because the idea is you're going to a random location and you're exploring new worlds. So on the first this first really test walk that we did, we had sidewalk chalk of a rainbow, this house with these wagon wheels. I didn't even get to put in the book how many wagon wheels were everywhere all of a sudden in my own neighborhood. You don't go far. That's the wildest thing. And there was rainbow pictures. There was wagon, and cactus. Not only was there a drawing of a cactus on the ground, which there was no other sidewalk drawings, and it was at the first point that it took us to. So it literally will land you in front of a house or in an area. And it started to become wild, because once you hit one area, you can redo the app again, have it pick another spot, kind of, go from there. And that's what we found to be really interesting, because when you're doing it alone, it's great. But I found when you do it with another person, it's cool to see which one of you it's almost meant for, if that makes sense. At least that's solid in my experience, where even if I'm the one that gets the higher number of the location, sometimes it'll be all stuff that is clearly directed to him. His great uncle's a really very famous baseball player that he's named after. One of the first walks we went on, and you don't have to write any notes or anything, but this is a really, I think, amazing way to start manifesting stuff, because it just kind of overrides all of your normal behavior and takes you out of your predetermined, if you will, pathways, which we're going to circle back to your story with the turns. Solly wrote out his uncle and put baseball and something else. And there was about 30 different examples of angels, and, Anaheim, or we have the LA baseball team here called the Angels, and baseball this. And one of the final things that we found was, it was on a wall, and it was a drawing, but it said King Solomon, which his name is Solly for Solomon. But what's even wilder is after you get back from these walks, it sounds crazy, and I encourage everyone to just do it and try it out, because I knew there was something there when I first started researching and reading about it, but it really isn't until you go out and then come back, you feel completely different. There is something about these walks, and you can drive a car. I talk about it in the book, and everybody who does this needs to read the frequently asked questions and the disclaimers and everything on their website. But you feel like, I can't even quite verbalize it, but everything is different, and you feel really weird. You see houses you've never seen before. People have a lot of weird things with their electronics, where their phones die. We have this happen all the time on these walks. No one knows why. I'm not going to attribute it to anything. Maybe our phone batteries just suck, but I don't think that's what it is, because there are a lot of things that keep popping up with everyone who does these experiments. And you can read about them online day to day. People are posting them. Obviously right now, stay indoors, be safe, follow, the guidelines. Whoever's watching this, if we're still under the guidelines that we're under with the World Health Organization, the CDC. So, there's a lot of other cool exercises and things you guys can do right now. But once we're all able to be out in the world again, I really think everyone should test it out, read about it, and do it, because there's nothing quite like doing it. And what we realized is it is manifesting on steroids. Everything, what I started to figure out, and Sally and I realized, was not just the notes before the walk, but everything we were scripting and writing was coming in, honestly, hundreds of times faster. I've never seen anything like it. And we started, Sally always has this really interesting thing with scripting, where he tells people, well, if you're not realizing any or having any luck, stop for a week and see how your life shifts that after you've been doing it for a while. And a lot of people notice that things aren't flowing as well. And we tried it with the Phantom Bot, where we would stop. Now, the good thing about the Phantom Bot is nothing goes badly if you stop. Not that it does with scripting, but it's just things aren't manifesting as quickly when you do it maybe once every 2 or 3 months. This isn't something you have to do every day. I don't know if I'd even recommend it, because we were doing that for a few months, and it gets a little trippy, but it's really, really cool. It's something, though, I encourage everyone to try out for themselves and really just dive in, because what we've found and with everyone that we know that's tried it, is everything starts to align and come in, little things, big things. And my theory is that it's utilizing this technology with the quantum computer that they don't even quite understand. Most computers that we're used to, all computers are zeros and ones, and the quantum computers are operating, somehow pulling essentially what they say is information and data out of a parallel framework of information than we're used to. They even use the phrase parallel universe. It's not quite that, but it helps people understand that it operates in a different way. So I don't want to confuse people, but it's a truly random number, and it's a truly random location as far as getting you out of where you are. Because the reason that what happened with you that's so fascinating with the car story, why the turns tripped you up, is at the end of the day, we do have this really predetermined, I don't know if I'm going to say habits or pathways, but there is a framework that this app and this bot and these quantum computers are helping people to break. I have it. I couldn't believe the things I saw in my maybe 10 blocks in a circle around my house, houses, people, statues, and toys, and lawn ornaments, and bizarre sheds and buildings, and just everything that you think you are aware of and perceiving and going to. The roads I've never heard of, streets, cul-de-sacs. I mean, there's so many bizarre things that are right in your neighborhood. And that's the whole idea behind randonauting, the Fadenbot, is there's just this whole world to explore literally in your own tiny little nook of, of the world that we don't even see. So we have this sort of, I think we program ourselves. They don't really know why we're stuck in these little predetermined triangles, if you will, but there was something that's always going to make, if you did 30 left turns or always made a right turn. And there's I believe, something going on in our perception that our brain is taking in data, but it goes the fastest, easiest, quickest route. And even if it's somewhere maybe you've not been before, you get lost, then it tends to go into essentially like a backup framework of, okay, well, I'll make lefts because that worked for my survival last time. And then that habit or that thing creates sort of this predetermined world. What's really great, though, about the story you told is the dream that you had. So I believe that we're not in some predetermined, like very sad, that would be so depressing environment. I think that our brains and how we dream, even like you just said, and what we create in our lives, a lot of times when we're visualizing or meditating or dreaming, it's breaking us out of the normal, just, I always think it's like autopilot. We can be on autopilot. I think a lot of people in New Thought will understand this, and this is how I believe. I think New Thought helps us to break out of autopilot and start taking control, right, of the things we bring in our lives. And I think that dreams, a lot of time, we release a lot of resistance when we're sleeping. A lot of information comes in. And to me, now, knowing what I've studied about time and manifesting, and now what I'm learning and loving about quantum mechanics and computers and this bot, to me, hearing that, if I was talking to you, Harv, and I'll just say it publicly, it really feels like the way time is such a, I would say, flexible thing that I didn't even realize till I did the research of the book. Everything led you to the point of even having the conversation or reading the book with the Fadenbot, because we found a lot of people have very similar experiences where they had this one weird thing that happened years ago that broke them out of it, and they get led to the Fadenbot and to this app. And now it's getting into the thousands and hundreds of thousands of people who are exploring it. But I think, a lot of people go, well, isn't that predetermined then? If everything's predetermined that I got to the Fadenbot, you can argue that, but once you start using it, it breaks you out of it. So nothing after that is predetermined. So when we're creating and manifesting and utilizing all these tools, we're operating sort of outside of normal time. And I think that you've probably been seeking and searching for tools like this, not from me. I just write about it. I just do the research, but I like to show people the coolest stuff that helps them to manifest. And I think that our minds work in ways that we don't, of course, totally understand, but that we don't always know right away why something happened. And it turns out for a lot of my friends who do what we do, it's always to take a new step or to go further to push us into creating our reality in new ways. So I would say, because it just resonates so much, that dream that you had and what happened with that experience, even down to the clerk that ended up helping you, that was a snippy or whatever. I mean, it's interesting because it stuck with you as something that was wrong. And in a way it was, because it was letting you know your dream, in a way, the end point is interesting, and how you got there, and the arguing and the fighting and whatever for the, not knowing where you're going, not getting directions, but it stuck with you for a reason. It was showing you that maybe, we all do this. You were in a little bit of a predetermined area of that something was going on. This is now the answer essentially to a question maybe you didn't realize you were asking.
That is, boy, there's so many things going in my mind, but yeah, I think that definitely feels right. There's a connection to it. I've studied Kabbalah with a mystic rabbi for a number of years, and there's three things I think that relate to this. Let's see if I can nail them down quickly. But one is he says the actual Torah, and the translation he uses for Torah is cosmic blueprint. So he says that the true Torah is the white space behind the letters. Oh, interesting. And so when I saw the triangle, I thought, oh my God, that fits. Wow. The other is that free will is a little mixed in their view. Yes, it's there, but we are incredible creatures of habit, and that ties into so much of what you've been talking about here. Because if there's a common factor between the chaos game, between the
perception,
the perception, the other piece is that it's the RAC is or RAS. It's all needing to break out of the norm. And another thing that the rabbi always says is that it's it's the consciousness, the higher consciousness that we access, the highest self, is like the 2%, like a tiny bit, only because we're so tied up in our habitual patterns. Yeah.
And that's the coolest thing about not just the Fatum but all the research and science in the book is it's backing up. I mean, I keep saying to anybody who will listen, people have known this for a while. There's certain religious studies and spiritual practices and things like New Thought where the leaders, they knew this. The science that's coming out now and these insanely cool tools are really just backing up what we've been told, but also that's very helpful, at least, for people who may not want to study something that maybe sounds religious to them or too spiritual. It's really, really cool for those people who maybe would have never gotten to experience. And now they're open because of the science backing it up to reading the religious or spiritual texts. And I think that's a beautiful, really awesome thing. I love what you just said though, because, for me, hearing that is just more confirmation of this idea of the science and the spirituality really being the same thing. We just didn't have the tools to understand or prove things, I think, and there was such a diversion of the two worlds that what I found in my research and where I landed was that scientists and people who study spiritual things just stopped communicating. They didn't really realize that they were at the same point because no one was looking in the other direction, if you will. And now they are. And that's fascinating about the Torah. I didn't know that. I mean, that's a fantastic example.
I'll throw out one more, just because it seems to fit, which is the rules, the laws, the keeping kosher, all these things. With Sukkot, you build the little shed out on the patio and you go outside. But the rabbi always says that it's not to be onerous, it's not to be nasty, it's to push us out of our complacency, to push us into the unfamiliar. Then the other interesting thing was, he said that if you ignore those things, there's sort of a karmic kickback. But if you do these things, these inconveniences, if you push yourself out of the norm through the various laws and customs and things, that you're inconvenienced, yes, but then there's not the need to bump up against the karmic lessons to as great a degree.
This is blowing my mind a little bit. I just wrapping up the next book for next year. And now I'm gonna have to pick your brain about that, because one of the things that I actually had a really old book from, it's around the 30s. I don't have it in front of me, but it's from the Royce Christyn library, what they used to publish way back. I used to go to this bookstore down the street and just buy any book title that would interest me. I still do this. I buy way too many books, but I love reading. And I always find they come in handy at some point. But this one book, Royce Christyn, they had this really interesting belief where certain days of the week and certain hours of the day were actually periods, period A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. And every day for about 3 hours fell within a different period, starting at midnight to midnight. So basically, maybe on Tuesday, period F, which is a really good period, would be from 3:50 to 9:20. And it's always the same hourly marks, but it's been really interesting and fascinating, because one of the experiments that we are doing for the second book that we're still working on, this is what's been holding it off from being just totally done, is applying things like you just talked about and these different customs and practices and these belief systems that that talk about certain times of day and certain things to do and not do, and seeing, just not letting them die. Because my hope is that, and what I've been finding with at least this one very specific example that we've been working on, is there is something going on there with, there are certain good times. It's funny because in the book it's like, don't buy livestock or cattle. I mean, it's very of its time as far as the normal things that day-to-day people would be doing, but you could apply it to the current reality or situation or world, whatever you want to call it, that we all live in. And there's good times to ask for favors. So what I did was, when I was reaching out to friends and people for endorsements for the book, I was already halfway through the second book, and I was like, well, let me try just testing, these 40 people I'm going to reach out to with the publisher. Let me see if there's a difference of reaching out in, they say a B period is better for politicians and an F period is better for asking for favors, from different types of people. So it was the wildest thing, because the people, and I stacked it a little bit because I knew who I really didn't want to say no or have a bad, experience with or whatever. But there were some people that I never thought would write us back or be interested. And very similar people who even knew each other, I would have the experience where if I would do it in the period that it said, immediately get back, or within a day get back and be super enthusiastic and love it. But if I wrote it in a period that it said, don't contact people, really bad to ask for favors, I still haven't heard back from them. So there is something to all of this, what you just said, and now you're the third person that has mentioned this idea of timing with things being really important outside of what we've already looked into and I've already studied. So now I have to go dive into that. But it's all connected, and the idea is fundamentally the same, which is breaking out of the habits, if you will. Like you said, we're creatures of habit, and breaking out of them really does bring in new things into our lives, in my experience. And now with the technology and things like the FatumBot app, I mean, it's literally in our pockets, so we could take it out and say, all right, I need to break out of my Sierpinski Triangle, if you will. And you could go out on a 20-minute walk, and the waves, if you will, nothing has been the same since we started using it. I know for everyone that I know, and even my partner and I in this house, it's not a scary thing. It might sound this way when I say it, but once you do it, like, it doesn't feel like you go back to the exact same way of life. Because, and I really encourage people to go out and do it, because words, even when you research it, don't quite do it justice of how amazingly cool and weird it is as you're going on these walks, what you feel. We've had times where it just seems like the weather is weird. It just stops, like the wind stops and the sun, everything's quiet, or we see birds act really weird. That's one thing they don't know. They don't know why. Again, this is really very, very new publicly. They've been researching it for a few years and using it. But birds, a lot of owls, pictures of birds and symbols of birds, it just people tend to notice now. It could also be the RAS, now that everyone going out there is thinking to look for birds. I noticed though, Solly is like the Birdman now. My partner, when we go out, he had a hummingbird come up and fly around his head for almost the whole walk. One time we were doing the FatumBot app. Another time they were dive bombing his head. It's just very strange. Like, not like just, oh, I saw a picture of a bird, but even the birds are acting weird. But they liken it to, and I've noticed this with other people, you will see like people look at you really weird. The only time the cops have ever been called on me in my entire life was going out on this app in my own neighborhood. 3 people apparently called the cops because they had never seen us before, which was wild. Now the cop laughed because he was like, because they, I take pictures, not of people's property, which, by the way, anybody watching, don't break any laws. There's a way, if the FatumBot puts you at a location in the middle of someone's backyard, obviously I've had great experiences just going to the street or the sidewalk, the public property in front of it, totally fine. You just pick a new location. But people, like, they know you're not supposed to be there, if you will, and they act really strange. And we've had some really weird experiences, like I said, with the cop getting called, because I was taking a picture of a tree. It's just because it had this face that was carved into it. People have all sorts of weird little cool things, like at the location, the exact point when they get there, they have really out of place stuff. For us, we're at in LA County is on the very edge, and it's about 30 miles inland, and there was all these seashells. I have pictures of it in the book, and Solly had just drawn a picture of the golden ratio, which they say, it's actually not 100%, but the common conception is that, that's in everything. It's the golden spiral is in shells, everything else. So of course, I'm just the bummer who goes and researches it, but he thought that that was what was in shells and everything. And that's what he drew. And he wrote golden ratio. And the first point that we went up to were these shells literally sliced in half. And it was this beautiful Fibonacci sequence, golden ratio, looking shells, if you will, that you always see. And stuff like that is just mind blowing, because once you go out there and you do it, it's like nothing ever really works the same as far as what you do, because once you know that you're able to create things and then use this to break out of your mold, it's like you never really come back to where you were, but you don't really want to anyway, if that makes any sense. I'm rambling a lot. I apologize to everybody out there. It's all very exciting to me.
Yeah, well, it's exciting to us because, as I told you yesterday, Diane and I are chomping at the bit to get out there and started experimenting with the bot. So it's a practical question there. Are you guys, when you do it, are you meditating beforehand before you put down your images, or you just sort of whatever comes to mind? How does that work?
So I'll clarify this too. So the images thing is really interesting because we added that as our own piece, because I figured that, because what people do is they say the original very basic instructions are go pick a point, do it around 5,000 meters from your house so it's in walking distance. A lot of very strange thing when people use cars. Cars break down, batteries die, brand new, like really weird. Again, I don't want to sound like a nut. I encourage people to just do their research and read the book, and also there's tons of information online, but really weird stuff with batteries, like phones draining and dying. But what they tell you to do is bring up like a backup battery, even if it's only a few blocks. Our phones have not acted the same ever since we started doing this. They don't know why. They know there's something going on. Again, we might be decades from knowing what that part is, or maybe only a year. Who knows? Things are going so fast these days. But to answer your question, the initial instructions are basically pick a point, go there, and they actually say, because it's also great for the environment, bring a trash bag and collect any trash, nothing disgusting, be safe, but pick something up. And maybe it's, obviously we're in Southern California, we have orange trees everywhere and lemons everywhere. People put them out in baskets, the extra ones. We do it too out in the sidewalk for the neighbors to get. So that's what we would take a lot of, would just be lemons. If someone had a basket out right near the point. But the idea behind it was when you get to your point, pick up a piece of trash, because it's helping the environment if you see something there. But it's also the scientists researched and figured out that there was something happening when they would take a piece of something from the environment where they were led to by the Theta bot, that it would help ground this new reality into their experience a lot faster. Meaning when they would collect trash or something, that's how they got to the point of just collecting trash, because they were like, well, we can't take things from people's properties, but it's just interacting with the environment and taking something, rock, a pebble, a leaf. You really could do anything as long as it's legal. And the manifesting and the things that started to happen would stay. And what I mean by stay is they would last. It wasn't like something would manifest or you'd have a really, you're wanting something forever, or someone to call you forever, go on a date with you, and they ask you on one date and then it just goes away. But that person maybe would become more a part of your life versus not taking something from the environment. It's almost like the universe would try to correct them a little bit more. So they tell you to take a picture, take a piece of trash or whatever from the area. If you can't, don't worry about it. Take a picture. I found that's fine, because I got really sick of picking up gross trash, even though I had gloves on. But that was the base instructions. And at the exact point, normally in my experience, within, like, you could stand there and literally look around you in a circle, and something related to what you were thinking about in the day or what you've been working on would appear. Or sometimes they're really funny and really random and really weird, but it's weird enough and out of place enough that you will know, and everybody out there watching, anybody who tries it, you will know when you hit it might take a couple walks, sometimes maybe 2 or 3 in a day. Once you get it and you land on the right spot, I mean, it's always the right spot, but once you start seeing and knowing what to look for, as far as just maybe a weird sculpture made of trash or fruit, or there's just very strange things I've noticed, and everybody else who's out there who has been testing it out and playing with it have noticed, and this is thousands of people, just really interesting things. So they say to take a picture, and what we did, to answer your question, was we tried it both ways. We would meditate and just kind of clear our minds and release that resistance and write down what I always say I get impressions of things. Some people hear or see or visualize. I had this with Harvey yesterday for everybody out there watching, where I was meditating in the morning and I heard, or whatever, I got this impression really loudly of Harv. It was Harv. I was like, oh, okay. So as soon as I got on the meditation, I checked the email and he had written me. And then it happened again last night. Literally, I was doing something else. And sometimes after I meditate, I'm sure everybody out there gets this, where after you meditate earlier in the day, it tends to kind of stick and it stays with you, and you kind of that open feeling if you're in a good space. And I was really lucky yesterday. I was in a really good space, and it happened later in the day where I just felt this urge to check. I just checked my email literally 5 minutes before. I had nothing new. And then I felt Harvey. I was like, okay, let me check. But that reminds me of meditating. So I get impressions. Sally's very visual. You know, my mom, she's very word oriented when she meditates. So it's a little weird because not everybody gets something. I say trust your instinct, and if you feel like meditating before you do it, absolutely. But I will add, we've tried it both ways, and for me, it works just as well when you just kind of see to your pants, because the idea with scripting, of course, is that you're writing down what you want rather than you're programming it, right? You're, instead of receiving the information, which meditation obviously is super important. But as far as scripting goes, I found it's really interesting to just sort of put out their images, and I would start simple, but you know, you can get pretty detailed pretty fast without meditating, because if it helps you just to be in a better frame of mind, just in general in your life, then meditate and then do it. But it's not necessary. What is necessary, I'd say, is definitely if you can take if you don't have fruit, or take a rock or a piece of sand or anything that's legal, you know, it literally can be collecting trash, recycling, whatever, and take a picture if you can. If you're out in the middle of a park, you know, take a blade of grass. Like, it literally doesn't have to be anything insanely weird. It can be very normal thing. And I always try to take photographs of whatever the things are that we see on the way that are really weird. We notice patterns. So Harv, like the weirdest patterns. It's almost like the universe. To me, it's like this bot and this app is the first ever phone line to the universe, what we call the universe, what I call the universe, because it feels like the universe is talking to us when we do it. And what I mean by that is, we notice it's almost like it sends a message to, and now we know it's recognized, but to say hi and hey, we're here, or the universe is saying, hey, look, we got you guys, we're with you. I mentioned cacti earlier, cactuses and cacti. I don't know. Everybody always yells at me when I say cacti, or if I say cactuses. I don't know. Anyway, but for Sally, even though it was my original drawing was actually of a cactus for one of the first trips we ever took with the Fatum bot. I say trip, a few blocks away. His thing is cacti, and I mean images and pictures and actual cacti, and they will. And when I say there are weird cactuses out there, cactus plants, there are. We never knew, but we'll just start seeing these patterns of. For me, it's become wheels, wagon wheels. It becomes ridiculous. Not even just like in a reticular activating system way. It's every foot on this 3-block journey. For whatever, on the ground, there'll be someone, you know, littered a piece of paper, and it literally says wagon wheel with a photograph. And then 2 feet later is an image on the wall. And it just starts to, especially as you're getting closer and closer to the point, I'm like, oh, this is so cool. Hi, like whatever's out there, if this is me or the universe, I think it's both. And it's this community, and you can feel it. And that's why I just say, like, don't take my word for it. Everybody out there, like, go do it, because it is just so amazing. And when you realize that you have this very easy, you basically have a cell phone with a way to communicate now with the universe, it just changes your whole perspective on what's possible. And I mean, there's a lot of other examples between cactus and wagon wheels, but it's a pattern for us all the time. It's one thing, and it took us a few trips to really notice what it was, because it's not always those two things. Sometimes it'll be something like rainbows or images, and that's the wild thing. Places you wouldn't expect to see a wagon wheel or a cacti or a rainbow or whatever it is, whether, you know, normally you'd see a rainbow in the sky or in an image, instead it's on the ground, or it's like a keychain was one thing we found. Someone had a dirty old keychain, and it was right at the point, and it was a big rainbow on it. Just weird. Yeah, I mean, wild and weird things. And it's like this communication is so much easier for both us and the universe, or whatever you want to call it, when you're doing things like this. And it continues. It doesn't just stick around when you're on the walk. I've noticed, at least in the year that we've been really, really doing it, which is why I wanted to write about it in the book, because it's just, I felt like the whole world needs to know about this. Not enough people know. Now they will. Couple journalists have started to pick up on how amazing this is, and mainstream people too, because it's really easy for them to write about because it's quantum computers. It's not something super woo-woo. It's very woo-woo when they do it, but they don't know how to explain it as well, I think, as, you know, people who study this like us. They're getting there, though. I give them that, because they're really having profound breakthroughs in their lives. But I don't know. I could go on and on, but it's an amazing tool, and I really, really want everybody to use it and try it and see what it brings to their lives, because to me, it just lasts. And now I feel like there's this open communication with the universe basically around me, because I see it in everything around me now. Whether it's online or articles or people saying something, it's just something it flows much better.
I love how you put it, a phone line to the universe. And you know, I got chills reading that second section. I mean, the whole book is wonderful. But just the idea that I really felt like I was seeing the wave of the future, that, you know, there are exciting things on the horizon, and plenty exciting now. So everyone, we've been into part 2. Part 2 will be looking at a metaphysical approach to the coronavirus. We'll be most importantly looking at the scripting method, how it can work in your life, and what Royce has done to work these many years to increase the percentage of times that our dreams can come true, and a lot more. So be sure to check us out on part 2. And once again, a fascinating book, just so cool.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited I'm glad you love it. That means the world to me. So hopefully everybody else does too.
I think they will, absolutely.